Tonight's program is a joint endeavor between the School of Cinema and the Center. And I'm going to briefly introduce Britta, and she's going to introduce our two esteemed speakers. I want to say a little bit about tonight's program because last year I had the privilege of doing something similar to tonight, although one never reproduces exactly the same thing, at San Jose State. And it was so fabulous. And it was, within 6 or 7 months of when Abbas Kiarostami died. But he still, I think, has such a resonance around the world and will for many, many decades. And when I saw Ahmad recently, I said, we're going to do the same thing up here in San Francisco State. So it's really great. I'm so grateful to you, Ahmad, and also to Hossein Khosrowjah, who's a professor here also in the Bay Area. So without further ado, I'm going to say a little bit about my colleague, Britta. She's the director of the School of Cinema here at San Francisco State. She teaches advanced filmmaking, screenwriting, and feminist studies as a professor of cinema. She's a writer and director of fiction and hybrid fiction documentary films. Her features and shorts have received such awards as the Grand Jury Prize for Best Short Film at Sundance, Best U.S. Film at Mill Valley, the Harlem Fest Mira Nair Award, and a number of other national and international awards. She's also author of a book on female voice and sound in film, Into the Vortex, Female Voice and Paradox in Film. And she's also a Guggenheim Fellow, and I'm very lucky to have her as a colleague. So thank you, Britta.
One of the greatest pleasures of this year has been getting to know Persis and getting connected with all the great things that you're doing at the center. And the highlight of my spring has most definitely been doing this weekend course that we are just completing with this final stage of it. So about 70 people, or at least 50 people in this room, are taking that class and have been watching the films of Abbas Kiarostami with me for the past 24 hours. We've been having a marathon. I think it's been an absolutely rapturous experience for everyone. We got behind time, so we didn't get to talk about the last two films very much. So I know that they are loaded with questions for you. So without further ado, I would like to just turn us over to the main event, say a few words about our esteemed guests here. First, I'd like to introduce Hossein Khosrowjah. I actually know Hossein because he got his MA here in the School of Cinema, at that time the Department of Cinema. So he's one of our alum. We're very proud of him. He's since gone on to teach at multiple institutions. He has his PhD from, remind me?
University of Rochester.
University of Rochester. And he has just finished a book on Kiarostami. So he is the perfect interlocutor for our other guest, Ahmad Kiarostami. And I just want to say a few words about him. Ahmad is the co-founder and CEO of Koantum, which is a new startup to teach science to elementary school students in the United States. So it'd be interesting to hear about that as well. He serves on the board. He serves as a board member of the National Iranian American Council, and also for the Roxie Theater, which some of you may be familiar with, which is one of the oldest operational movie theaters in the United States. Before Koantum, he founded Photomoto, where he holds 2 patents on distributed eco-commerce, and which was acquired in 2012. He also founded several companies in Iran, including Negah, the first multimedia and online production venue in Iran, where he published award-winning multimedia products in cinema and visual arts. He also had a leadership role in Microsoft Middle East. He has worked with several Iranian directors and has served on the boards, as I mentioned, of the Roxie and also the San Francisco Cinematheque.
It's great to be here. And we don't have a specific program to talk. We're going to improvise. We did this once. I think it was okay. I have some stuff that I can show you from my father's pictures, videos, earlier work, graphic designs, title designs, and based on how conversation goes, I'm going to show some of them, not all of them, but if you want to see anything specific, know anything specific, feel free to interrupt us, ask questions.
Yes,
It's completely free form.
It has a free format, very platonic. Just feel free to just break in and interject. One thing I would like to also start with is because last time I had a 4 or 5 minute introduction. I didn't do it this time. I just want to start with an image tonight, if possible.
Before you start,
Yes.
can I say something?
Of
one
course.
thing that I can imagine somebody has a marathon of Godfather or Star Wars. I don't know how Kiarostami marathon would be. Weekend. Even one is enough to put you in sleep. So I hope you're awake. Okay, enough attention.
But remember, your father calls the films that put you to sleep kind movies.
Yes.
Movies that put you kindly to sleep, but deprive you of sleep later that night. That would be the difference between an action movie that puts you at the edge of your seat, actually deprives you of sleep the moment that you're watching it, and then you immediately forget everything about it as soon as you leave the theater. And a movie that puts you to sleep, but late at night you wake up and say that, what did I just see? And what was it that is bothering me? So
now you're stealing my lines that I stole from my father.
remember, you have no monopoly over your father. Your father was a universal artist that, and I want to say this, that each of us has his or her own Kiarostami. And each of us gets the Kiarostami that he or she deserves. And I don't mean it in a snarky, facetious way. I mean it as if the Kiarostami that builds the world that we like to kind of, just occupy and to walk in. Yeah. Go ahead.
In Iran, we say Beit al-Mal.
Beit al-Mal.
Okay, so you want this picture?
Yes. So I want to start with this. This is not Kiarostami, obviously. Those of you who remember from introduction to the arts classes, one of the classes that I teach, and I spent maybe half an hour, 45 minutes on this particular image, one of my all-time favorite image from the late Renaissance. This is Peter Bruegel the Elder, Hunters in the Snow. And this has been brought up a lot in relationship to Kiarostami's posthumous film. The way that actually the first sequence rises from this image. And I read a lot of reviews, and I'm going to make this very short because we have a long night. I just make it very short. That everything that I read about Peter Bruegel the Elder's painting is about formal aspect of the film. Is about a formal aspect of the image. How the dust of the snow, actually the snow dust on the leaves actually starts to come to life. Different things that actually have to do with the composition, the colors, and everything else that has to do with the image. I want to take a slightly different path. And I'm not saying that those formal observations are not correct or not actually to the point. But as Peter Bruegel was called the painter of the people. Actually, he was called the peasant painter, even though 7 generations in his families were all Flemish masters. But he was called peasant painter, painter of the peasants, because he had this affinity with the everyday, with the prosaic, with things that in the eye of other painters of the same period were insignificant. People warming themselves beside the fire. The villagers skating on the ice. 3 hunters coming back from a long, and you can see how tired they are, with just 2 rabbits to show for their long travails. Everything about the painting actually makes him a painter of the people. And I'm thinking that one of the affinities, one of the close connections that I feel with Kiarostami, and like I said, we each have our own Kiarostamis, other than the genius, master, formalist, the chameleon that constantly changed and shifted his styles and his interests, is that he always was an artist of the people. He was somebody whose work actually appealed to the masses. I remember a discussion here with Kiarostami himself 18 years ago at Stanford, in which somebody accused him of ignoring and completely dismissing the middle class, the urban middle class in Iran. And he said, I will make the films that I think are important enough to be made, because it was just in the middle, right after the trilogy and The Wind Will Carry Us and Taste of Cherry. And he said, the films that I make is only films that I think will appeal to what I like, and I think it's significant for the people these films are made for. That makes the whole painting about this gloomy, foreboding feeling. But also the fact that it's about ordinary people. It's about a prosaic moment in everyday life. Okay, let's move on to your...
So since you started with this, and like I said, we're going to improvise, I think I want to show you the first clip of 24 Frames. 24 Frames is my father's last film that he didn't get to finish. I finished it, and we premiered the film at Cannes in 2017, and it's coming out in 4 weeks at the Roxie, and it's just going to be here for 3 days because it's an experimental film, probably very limited audience. I want to show you the first episode of that. Just a little information. This is an experimental film. Nothing happens. There's no dialogue. There's no actor. None of that. He said that when I look at the painting, I wonder what happened before and after. The painter drew the best frame that he saw. He picked one frame, but I wonder what happened a few minutes before and a few minutes after. And he started with classical paintings. He started with this, actually, with this painting. But then he moved to his own photography. I'm going to show that, and then we can talk about other things.
Thank you, Ahmad, for sharing that with us. Britta, please feel.
That was really beautiful. It actually made me think about while I was cramming for this class that I was teaching on someone whose work I admired but who had never taught a class on before. And I was reading a book that has many of his ruminations on filmmaking and life, and talking to students in particular that he gave workshops to. And in one of them he talked about some story of Renoir. Now I can't remember. You probably know the story, but a painter was asking someone, "Why did you paint this house there? And what's inside the house? And who's in the house next to the fireplace? And why is the smoke coming out?" And the painter was not able to give an answer. And he said, until you can give an answer to that question, you won't really be creating art. And that sort of made me think of that. I'm sure that I've mangled the story, but I think the essence is there.
That was good. Yeah. You're talking about.
Yeah, you can just turn that.
You're talking about Paul Cronin's book, Masterclass.
Yes.
Abbas Kiarostami. That if you are interested in his cinema or in his work in general, I highly, highly recommend that book. I think it's by far the best book ever written about his work. Paul went to his workshops over 10 years, to all over the world. And he wrote this book based on those workshops.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful.
Okay, what's next, Ahmad?
So last time you started with his, how he started cinema. Do you wanna,
We can do a sequential overview. Yeah, okay.
That'd be great.
So let's start with Bread and Ali.
So actually, before he started with Bread and Ali, he made over 50 commercials, TV ads, that we don't have access to it. I've only seen one of them many years ago, and I don't have access to any of them, which is a pity. But that's how he started. He was a student. Actually, he was working for the police. He tried, after he finished high school, he wanted to go to university, he couldn't get in. And then he stopped trying and he went to school, and then he met somebody, and just by chance he took the examination again, and he got into Tehran University and started doing painting. He started painting. But he was working for this company that were doing ads. Once somebody asked him, "How did you become a filmmaker?" And he said, "I'm Koantum, which was a center in Iran, said they want to start a division for cinema. And they invited me to start that division. And I'm going to show the very first film that he made, which was the very first film of Koantum." I said, "No, the very beginning of it." And he said, "My friend's shoes, Abbas Kiarostami's friends, were the same size of mine. And because of that, I became a filmmaker." And they said, "How?" He said, "Yeah, I was working in this police station, which was outside of Tehran, and I came back to Tehran for a weekend. And I went to see my friend. He had a store, and he said, 'Let's go to Tajrish,' which is like a happening place. And I said, 'No, my shoes are old. I don't want to come like this.' I said, 'Oh, I have a pair of shoes in the store. You can try that.' And he tried the shoes. They fitted, yeah. So they went there, and then they met somebody, and because of him, he started taking these classes, and he took the exam again, and went to university and started studying. So that was the reason that he explained. So he started with that, and he started doing a lot of commercials. And one of the interesting thing was, this is in the 70s. In the 60s, early 60s to late 60s, actually, early 70s. Most of the commercials back then, they had a woman in it, in a very sexy way and sexual way. All of his 50 commercials didn't have even a single woman in that way. In some of them, they had women singing, because everything back then, they had to sing and do things like that. But there was no trace of the typical woman that you had in commercials in any of his work. And then he did some illustration. and then he started the film division of Koantum. The very first film that he did there, which is Koantum's first film, was called Bread and Alley. And it's interesting because the elements that you see in this film, you see them in many of his films later on. The dog, the old man that he can't hear, you have the exact same thing in another film, the alleys and all that. So you see all of that in his later films. And he always said that, I believe we only have one or two stories that we say it in different forms.
Soccer ball too.
Soccer ball too, yes.
There's always soccer motive in Kiarostami's cinema.
That was actually in his second film.
There is no.
I don't
kicking
think.
of the, no.
No, there's nothing in the first one. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah.
But let's see that.
Yeah, let me mention while Ahmad is loading that up that he does talk about the commercials, the 50-second, minute-long commercials as the best filmmaking class in terms of economy of time, in terms of actually trying to condense the ideas in the most compact and condensed way. So he did actually, according to him, he learned a lot from those early commercials.
That is true. And he also mentioned, because I remember one conversation, specific conversation, that said, you're talking about time and all that, but in your films, you just have one guy sitting in a car driving for 10 minutes. How do you say that you're using time in the best way? And he said it's the feeling that you get, not using every second of the screen time. So let's watch this, Bread and Alley. One thing and the quality of this is really bad. Unfortunately, all the old films that we have, they're bad quality. He has a movie for children called Colors. I showed that to my daughter, and after it finished, she said, so where were the colors? Because they were all gray. But the good thing is we have got the license of all of the films, and we are restoring them, and in 2019, there's going to be a full box of his films from the very first one to the very last one. Good quality, restored, with subtitles in 3 different languages.
Fantastic. I was going to suggest to you that you do that.
Nune, Nune! Nune, Nune, Nune!
want to start with this institution, called Koantum, the Center.
I'm sorry, before you start, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but since I think your students, they saw some of the films,
They saw Where's the Friend's Home? They saw
Close Up?
Close Up.
Okay, perfect. So you see this kid in Where's My Friend's Home, and you see the old guy as well, and then at the beginning of this film, the kid was kicking that can. You see that in Close Up again. And you see a lot of those elements in his different films.
Yeah, definitely. And even in Taste of Cherry.
In Taste of Cherry, that's true.
And thereby Kiarostami sets up this causality. I mean, he's often called the most secular of all Iranian filmmakers, exactly because there is this clear pattern of causality that's set up in his films. For example, the problem is set up, and then everybody starts proceeding to find the solutions. That would actually start a whole series of films for children with the problem, number one, number two, the guy who's got a flat tire, all the films that's about actually having this central problem and then proceeding to solve it. The reason I brought up Koantum is that I was in Koantum this past January, and I got all these Kiarostami's books. I mean, the books about Kiarostami's films, still pretty much some of the most popular publications of Koantum. And it's an amazing institution for those of you, for Britta's students who don't know what Koantum is. I'm sure that it was called the Center for the Intellectual Development of Young Adults and Adolescents. This was an amazing institution that started in 1968-69, and the head of the filmmaking department was a gentleman named Ebrahim Forouzeh, who made this film, The Key. The Key, which with a script from Kiarostami. Kiarostami actually wrote the script for it. So those of you who think they're completists in Kiarostami cinema, don't forget that there are a whole bunch of films written by Kiarostami, made by others, including The Key and and some of Panahi's films. Go ahead.
So, Ahmad, do you have copies of all of the films that he made while at Koantum?
I have copies that are not good quality like the one that you saw, and they don't have subtitles, but again, the good thing is, in 2019, all of them are going to come out with good quality, including there's one film called قضیه شکل اول شکل دوم, case number 1, case number 2, which is, I think, is one of the most important political films ever made in Iran. He made that right after the revolution. And it's a very simple thing. He interviewed people in different sectors who were involved in the revolution. A very simple question, that something happens in the class and the teacher sends 2 rows of students, like 10 students, to send them out. Say, you either tell me who it was and come back and study, or you stay out for the whole week. And the question is, should they say who he was and come back to the classroom? Or should they keep their unity and stay out for the whole week and miss the class? And then, same year, it won the best prize of the Tehran Film Festival. The next year it got banned, and it's never been shown anywhere officially. You can find copies on YouTube and all that, but officially it's never been shown. So that is one of the films that's coming out as well.
And therein lies the big difference between Kiarostami and Bertolt Brecht. And I'm saying this because Brecht has a play, some of you might be familiar. He who said yes and he who said no. And actually there are 2 different possibilities of the resolution. Kiarostami's case actually completely opens it up to actual, real political figures, filmmakers who they kind of get involved and entangle with the question of whether it is ethical. So it's kind of like at the heart of Kiarostami cinema, ethics. Is it ethical to actually reveal who in the classroom did what, the naughty act, or because of the solidarity among the students to keep it a secret? So the answers are much more revealing of those who are in power in Iran at the time, from the Attorney General to various other people.
Yeah, people who were becoming in power, like Qutbzadeh was one of them. He was one of the guys who walked down from the airplane with Khomeini and then became the head of national TV, and a few years later he got executed. Or Khalkhali, or many others.
So, this is something that actually a pattern that we see in Kiarostami's cinema, that something very simple, something everyday, like the homework is one of, in my opinion, one of his best documentaries, the difference between punishment and reward as educational tools. And students actually respond to the camera, but what Kiarostami does that makes it different from any other filmmaker's work, except perhaps somebody like Frederick Wiseman at some of his best moments, is that you actually see the cinematic apparatus overpowering the kids responding to the question. It's the power of the camera and the lights and the sound and everything else that actually overdetermine the answers given to the question. It's not a neutral space. It actually completely lays out everything that exists between the supposedly neutral space between the camera and the subject in front of it.
I'm so happy that we have you here. So you can take care of all the technical things, and I can just tell you memories, stories that I have from my father.
I thought it was very fitting that the course I had with Britta was sound theory, theories of sound. And looking at Bread and Alley, it reminded me that it is only one instance, yes, Ahmad is absolutely right, the motive of kicking something down the road, whether it's a spray can or it's an object or a soccer ball, is there the old man that is hard of hearing, and we'll see that character coming back. A lot of these motifs actually are repeated, except for one thing, the overuse of sound and music. And he says in his various interviews that and it's hard to believe, I lacked confidence, coming from Kiarostami, that I wasn't sure what I was doing in terms of sound design, so I put a lot of music in it. It is something that he will resolve after this. In his future films, sound is very sparse. I mean, I'm talking about extra-diegetic sound. It's very sparse, or if he uses it to a very expressive, not just to cover his weaknesses.
He actually talks a lot about off-screen stories, things that you don't see, you only hear. So you have that a lot in his films, and there's sometimes funny stories behind it. When he made The Wind Will Carry Us, I don't know if you've seen that film or not, but you don't see the whole crew, you only hear them. They're never on screen. And the reason was, on the original script, they were on screen, but the crew that were doing the film, they were so lazy. And he would get up at 5 a.m. and they wouldn't start before 7 a.m. And he got so upset that he decided to cut them off of the movie. That's why it started that way. There's actually a story about Bread and Alley that you saw. On the last scene, not very last one, but the one when the boy goes in and they shut the door and the dog sits there. He said that he had a long conversation with Zarindas, with the, not Nazar Fakhimi, who was the DP of the film. And he said, we spent 10 days because I want to have that in one cut. I don't want to cut. I want to have it in one scene that the kid goes in, they shut the door, and the dog would sit there. And of course, the dog wouldn't do it. So they spent 10 days waiting for that, and they couldn't get it. And the DP tells my father, you don't understand cinema. There is something called cut. So you can have that scene and then have another shot when the dog sits, and then edit this and put them next to each other, and it's going to look like the dog sat there. And my father said it took me several years to learn he was right. And then it took me longer to learn I was right, because he said, because you don't have to copy other people, you don't have to follow the rules, you don't have to do everything that other people do. If I'm creating something, I have to do it the way I want to do it. And it took me a very long time first to learn the techniques that the DP was talking about, and then learn that I don't have to follow those.
Do you have any other, stories about what he said about sound and how he used sound over the years? I mean, for me, this was very interesting because obviously we've been looking at all these films and thinking about how he was using sound in the earlier films, but also, by the time he gets to certified copy, it's so astonishing the way in which separation is being articulated. But I think that even here, it seems to be already forming that, a really, really radical off-screen space, as you were saying, and being very content to have sounds that never have, let's say, a visual connection on screen.
Yeah. So what one thing that you may or may not know about my father's films was, except one film that Ibrahim Golestan did, before him he was the first person who started using live sound in his films in Iran, direct sound in Iran. And he said, I can never imagine you make a film and then have somebody else talk on behalf of your characters. It's not real. So sound was very important to him. And then he also talked, you're right, that this is a very unusual film because of the music, because he always said that, you can see in his other films, that the usage of music is very, very minimal. He said, music amplifies your emotions and make my audience emotional. And that's the opposite of what he wanted to do. He always said, he never wanted to make people emotional. I remember, again, for The Wind Will Carry Us, my friend Peymani Yazdanian did the film score for that. And it was a long story that how he got to do it, but I was there when my father was asking him what he wanted to do. He said, at the end of the film, I want music that is neither sad nor happy. And I don't want it to have a melody. So when people walk out, I don't want them to be able to repeat the melody. And when you listen to it, it's exactly that. It's neither sad nor happy and doesn't have a specific melody.
Yeah, let me just add this about sound. That since he started in Koantum, Koantum was only using the 16 millimeter technology, and those were actually cameras with sound. All the studio films shot on 35 were all post-production dubbing. This is actually exactly the paper I wrote for your class about post-production dubbing. And the post-production dubbing was the basic convention of Iranian cinema. So there were actors who would have 3 or 4 different dubbers, depending on exactly if they were playing a comic role or a tragic role or something else. But Kiarostami's cinema, because he actually started with a technology that was used before him by documentary filmmakers, the 16 millimeter cameras that were there, he started using it, and he was the first one that actually shot the first feature, Passenger, with direct sound. It's the first film in Iranian cinema with direct sound recording what was Kiarostami's Passenger. Actually, I have, right, this one. A Passenger that he shot in '73 in a full feature in direct sound. And that actually it wasn't just a technological decision. It was more than anything else an aesthetic and philosophical issue about the way that he understood reality.
I actually skipped something that I want to go back. Before he started making films, he made several film titles, including the one. So there's a very famous film called Qaysar in Iran that he shot the title for that film. And I want to show that. It's very short. I want to show that. Many years later, he made another title for the same director. That there's a wonderful documentary called 76 minutes and 15 seconds with Abbas Kiarostami by Yadullah Samadian. It's not available anywhere on internet, but it's coming out hopefully on Criterion with the same collection. I highly recommend seeing it, and you can watch him making the other title.
What film is that?
76 minutes. And,
No.
Sarbazan Jomeh, Fighter Soldiers.
Oh, so it's a post-revolutionary.
It's a post-revolutionary. It's a recent, yeah. And I have the title of that one too. Do you want to see it? I'm trying to show things that you can easily find on internet, because like his films you can find the libraries and the internet. Do you think this is good?
I think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Actually, I have a question regarding the title sequence that you just shown. Am I correct in those were tattoos on someone's body?
Yes, those were tattoos.
So my understanding is that tattoos aren't very prevalent in Iranian culture. And so I'm seeing those, and those are very clearly Iranian art, and I'm very curious as to the source material, as to the title sequence.
That's actually a very funny story, but tattoos have been there for a very long time, but a very specific group of people used to have tattoos. Lutis, yeah. And the film is about that
subculture.
That subculture, yeah. So, but it's very funny because my father, he was a very tiny person when he was in the 20s. And he said he took about 20 of them to studio to shoot this. But they didn't have a room, and they asked them to sit outside. And so it was extremely hot. And they were getting upset, getting really angry, and said, I didn't know what to do. And then one of the most famous actors back then, Nasser Malekmuti, that played in this film, he comes in, and they all get up because he was like their god. He was the same character. But he's like, what are they doing here? Just do something and get rid of this kid, meaning my father. And they finally give them a small bathroom to shoot this film. So they had and the reason that he could only shoot extreme close-up was he had a very, very small space in a bathroom. And he said they were so upset, so hot, all of them. So I was scared. And then many years later, he was showing his film in LA, and Nasser Malekmuti, the same guy, was there in the audience. I said, we're proud of you. And my father said, I was just sitting there remembering. He said, you don't know who I was back then. You don't remember, but I remember you.
Yeah, Nasser Malekmuti is still a revered figure. There were rumors of him appearing on a TV show this past month, and he's in his mid-80s. And there were like riots. It's like Malekmuti is going to be on TV. I mean, every headline in Tehran's newspapers were about Malekmuti appearing in Mehran Modiri's program. So it was like a big deal in Malekmuti. I want to say that your father always said that when an architect gets a strange, weird-looking parcel of land, he always creates the most creative and beautiful building.
He actually quotes that from his friend, Iraj Kalanteri. He's an architect Ivan knows very well. He always said, Iraj Kalanteri, that's Iraj Kalanteri. He said, whenever I have a good piece of land, like a square, I do a normal job there. But I've done my best jobs in weird pieces of land when I have a lot of limitations, and I have to be very creative with my design for those lands.
And I'm referring this to the small cramped space of a bathroom that has created actually this kind of really close, intimate, palpable tattoos. And the culture that we are referring to, the culture of toughs, which were like a major jahil or tough, were the major theme and the subject matters of a big part of commercial cinema of Iran in the 70s. And Kiarostami had nothing to do with that. I mean, Kiarostami's cinema has absolutely no affinity, except for this title sequence.
Do you want to see the other title?
That would be fantastic.
لب نخورون دست کم انگار یه دست از تو بالا دست رو دست کنه
So do we know if the idea for the sequence is your father's or
Yes, it was. Actually, you see the whole thing in that document that I mentioned in 76 minutes.
Okay, so I haven't seen that. And the very opening shot reminded me of Five, dedicated to Ozu. I mean, the opening shot, not the rest of the sequence, which is something that I think everybody should at some point see.
It's very hard to access. The DVD for Five dedicated to Ozu is like $70 online.
It's going to come. It's going to be part of that pack.
It's
Yes.
going to become affordable.
And hopefully, all of them are going to be available on Criterion's streaming service, Filmstruck.
That's fantastic. I have kind of a question that comes out of the class that we just had. Somebody was asking me what kinds of decisions he made when he was thinking about making a film, that there might be some issues with the censor, and how, in what way he thought through what that relationship was going to be like. I know he was known to kind of work within the limitations that were set, and find creative ways around those limitations, which is clearly, obviously, the way he liked to work. But I was kind of along the same lines, wondering when he was at Koantum. I don't know that much about, during the period under the Shah, what kind of censorship there was, but I imagine there was censorship. And then, of course, there was after the revolution. I'm wondering, did he experience different kinds of pressure when he was working there, and did he ever talk about how he thought about those issues in advance of making a project?
The answer is yes.
Okay.
Like I said, he's stealing my lines now, because the answer to your question was, that's how he usually answered that question, referring to his architect friend. That so some people try to they misinterpret this as censorship is a good thing. Of course it's not, but he said under censorship you become much more creative. And he said, I think that helped Iranian cinema a lot. Not because supporting censorship, but because it creates a lot of limitations. But also you see, like, some people say that he was anti-women because he didn't have women in most of his films until 10. But the reason that he explained a couple of times was, he said, I just can't have a woman in her own home, covering her hair, hanging out with her husband and children. It's just not real. It's not honest, and I can't show something that is not honest. So many times he just completely cut that, designed his stories in a way that he didn't have to do it. And in 10, actually, he wanted to explore those stories, but then he changed it. The reason he said, and then the story changed. The story at the beginning was she was a psychologist that suggested one of her clients to get a divorce from her husband, and because of that, the husband sued and they shut down the office, and that's why she was seeing her patients. That was the original story, but then it was changed. But then again, that was his way of showing a woman in a private setting, but wearing a full hijab, for example.
Right. Oh, that's fascinating.
But then there were things that he was not interested in having, like many things that they were banned in the Iranian cinema, like sex and those things. That was not his style. So.
Yeah, I just want to point out that my book that's coming out actually has a whole chapter, 46 pages, on censorship, and censorship particularly in regards to Kiarostami cinema. And I just want to use one term that I use in my chapter, and that's a term that I kind of have stolen from Jacques Lacan, structuring absence. There are structuring absences in Kiarostami's cinema in terms of things that cannot be represented. So their absence actually makes them much more visible in terms of not showing women, not actually even allowing the camera to go inside a domestic space when he believes the reality itself is a misrepresentation. If those of you are interested, there's actually also a very good discussion that Laura Mulvey has in New Iranian Cinema. She actually has this rhetorical argument. She has this argument against some of Iranian critics of Abbas Kiarostami, Roxanne Varzi and a few others that criticize Kiarostami for actually being a misogynist because women do not appear. And Laura Mulvey actually takes the mantle of defending Kiarostami's cinema in terms of actually making the question of gender and the possibility or the impossibilities of representation of gender an issue by the way that he actually approaches the subject.
Maybe another aspect that we can talk about is graphics and visual composition in his films. Bahman Farmanara, which is another famous director in Iran, he always said that, he told me many times that your father betrayed cinema in Iran because he makes films that look so easy, but it's so difficult. And people think, oh, it's easy, we're going to take a camera and record a child, and we're going to have something like that. He spent so much time on little things that you don't even see. For example, you saw Where's My Friend's Home? That little road that the kid runs there, it did not exist there. And there was a very tiny tree up there. So he made that tree, basically, and then he brought children from school to walk that path for a few days to create that path that you see. And to use it's a normal thing, but he created that visual thing, which is one of the signatures of his cinema now, that zigzag road. So he spent so much time, little details. I went to, again, when he was shooting The Wind Will Carry Us. And there's a cafe there that I'm sure nobody has even seen in that film, but there are little flowers on the wall that he himself painted all those things. And said people don't see it, but people feel it. So I want to show some of the posters that he designed from a long time ago. I don't have much to explain. These are just posters that he designed. But I thought it would be interesting for you to see.
Do you have years? Do you have years for them?
I roughly know this should be about 72 or 3. 72, I think. This is late 60s. This is again 60s. This is the 60s. This is 74, I think, or 75. So these are all 70s. No. He designed this for Momayez. Momayez was, they call him the father of graphic in Iran. And on the corner you have Momayez's signature, that's the signature.
This is for a concert.
This is for a concert, yes. This is for Tasvir Sal, which is a festival of photography in Iran once a year. It's an annual festival. And these are the name of all the people that have works in that year, that had works in that year. Again, in that film, 75 Minutes with Kiarostami, you see that how much time he spends on setting the spacing between the characters in this poster. You see it while he was designing this. That's it.
Speaking of little details, there's this fantastic book called this is his conversation with Jean-Luc Nancy, the French philosopher, called Evidence of Film. And in a conversation he had, Nancy asked him, I love the way that the earthquake has actually created that crack in the wall. And Kiarostami tells him, earthquakes do not actually create those nice zigzag cracks in the wall, which actually would rip the poster exactly on the contours of the wall. That doesn't happen. It was actually an effect that we artificially introduced the film. But apparently it has worked, because even you think that it is a natural disaster.
So let me tell you a story that when he made Close Up, that was the first film that I wasn't living with my father anymore when he made it. So I didn't know the details, and everything happened so fast because he read that story in a newspaper. He was ready to shoot another film, but he used the whole crew, camera, and all of that, went and shot this film, and the whole thing happened in a couple of months. So we know that he recreated the whole thing, and people reenacted themselves, except for the court scene. That's real. And you can see the difference because the other part was shot in 35 and the court's in 16 because they couldn't take a 35 camera into the court. Many years later, I was in San Francisco. This after I moved to San Francisco. A friend of mine, Godfrey Cheshire, they have a screening of Close Up at SF MoMA, and Godfrey Cheshire was here, and he was talking about Close Up, and he explained how this film is about bamboozle. And everybody's bamboozling the other one, like the Sabzian family, like my father goes in, the whole movie is about bamboozle. And said Kiarostami does that with the audience as well. And everything that you see in this film is fake, including the court scene. And then after the talk, I said, Godfrey, I appreciate it, but you know that's not true. He said, it is true. I said, no, the court scene is real. I said, no, it's not. said, it is. He said, it's not. So I had to call my father that night. I called him, said, Godfrey says it's not real. Which one is it? And there was a pause, and I said, Godfrey is right. So even the court scene is not right.
That's so funny, because in some of the things I read, it seemed to be implying that it was real, but that once he was in there with the camera, he started directing everyone, and so it became...
Yes, so that's the story that I knew as well,
Yeah.
but that's not... I mean, the part of the court scene, part of it is real, but more than half of it, they shot in a different location altogether.
And what about the interview when he first goes in and talks to Sabzian? When we see your father at the back of his head, and he's interviewing him and talking to him.
Yeah.
Is that?
I used to think that's real, but I don't know.
Yeah, we can't be sure. Even in the last scene with Mahmalbaf comes in, and the sound. I'm not talking about the whole scene. I'm talking about
that's
that's
a known story.
Yeah, yeah.
It's very funny that how because after he passed away, Mahmalbaf had an interview at BBC Persian, and he told the story, which is completely different from my father's version. But the story was when Mahmalbaf picks up Sabzian after the jail, after he gets released, he starts saying things that my father really didn't like, and said, we cannot repeat this scene. This is not something that we can shoot again. We need all this emotional reaction, all that. And said, I don't know what to do. He said, for a long time, it was, I thought I'm not going to use this in the film. But then I thought the problem is the things that he's saying. So I'm going to cut it out. And that's the solution that he had. Yeah. That he cuts the sound.
The faulty microphone.
Right. But what did Mahmalbaf say about it? What was his story?
I'm going to tell you a different part of the story, actually. When in the film, so they go to Ahmad Khos family home, and the guy rings the bell and says, who is it? And says, Sabzian. And there's a pause. Said, Mahmalbaf, if you remember that. And then my father said, we went there when they really went there after the film. Before shooting the film, when they went to the family's home, they ring the bell, and the guy is like, who is it? So my father says, Kiarostami. And there's a pause, and says, we just got rid of Mahmalbaf. Now you're saying Kiarostami.
Show some more.
Let me show you a movie called Solution. I had some limitation. I could only choose the films that have no dialogue because they didn't have subtitles. So I have 2 more short films to show you. And I can show you another frame from 24 Frames.
Frame 15.
You want to see the other one?
این چرا گفتی کی شده؟
آقای مشراقان 1400 تومن
1400 تومن
سلام علیکم چرا اول خوبه؟
شما خوبه؟
از منم
خوبی
از منم
روز بخیر بفرمایید
چرا؟
One interesting thing that that you see in his films, that as you said, when you look at his earlier films, which are usually for children or about children, he sees a challenge and then he provides a solution. But then in his later films, when you look at it, there's no solution anymore. And he always said, I cannot have an answer anymore. So that's, I think, Abbas aging and becoming wiser.
I want to refer to your father's modernism. And I'm referring to the first film, the Solution Number One. That's about this guy with the fixed tire trying to find. But at some point, the film is no longer about him, not the character. It's about movement in abstraction. Actually, the rotation of the wheel becomes the whole the center of the film. It's no longer about the drivers, the cars, even not about the man. It's about the movement, the rotation, and this sort of abstraction keep happening in your father's films, like in Close Up in the beginning, the spray that the aerosol that actually rolls down the street, or other things that these are objects that are put into motion, but then they become these free. They find their own agency. But your father was no grim or serious. I mean, he was serious, but he was no grim modernist. I mean, it was like he had the most wicked sense of humor. I mean, we should never lose the fact that your father was one of the funniest filmmakers that I have ever known in my life. And his humor is sophisticated. His humor is sometimes even, vicious, but he was he's the most compassionate, let me just say. But his sense of humor is really, really what sets him apart from a lot of other contemporary filmmakers. I mean, he's no Bellatar. He's no, there is humor. There is liveliness in his films.
Yeah, he always said that a good film is a film that half of it happens on screen and half of it happens in the audience's heads. And I'm very happy that your half was funny. But I can tell you one thing, that he was extremely playful all the time, like in the day-to-day life, with even the smallest things. He was always playing games, and to the point that sometimes you didn't know when he was serious. When he told stories, you never knew which part of it was real, which part of it was just making up stories. Yeah. And you have that. I just saw a video, an interview with Juliette Binoche about certified copy, and he said a story that I knew, but I had completely forgotten about it. That she said that when Juliette visited Iran, my father invited her to go to Iran, visit, and they took a road trip and went to Isfahan, and he told the story of certified copy a couple of times. The first time he said, that's a real story that happened to me. And she's like, yeah, that's a very interesting story. I said, did you believe it? He said, yes. I said, but it wasn't real. So he goes back and forth between this. But then at the end of that road trip, there was Juliette, my father's assistant, and my father, and said, we have to make this film. We have to turn this into a film. So they just bring out a piece of paper and they write the contract on a piece of paper right there in the car, and they sign it and exchange it. And that was the contract. I remember that the first half of his career, he made all of his films for Koantum. And the second half, he worked with our organization called MKADO in France. And he always told me a story that I didn't know if it was true or not. But then last year, I saw the old head of MKADO, and I asked him. And he said it was true. He said, I wanted to work with your father for many years, but he didn't. He wouldn't do it. And then once he came to me and said, okay, I'm willing to make my next film with you, but I have a condition. I said, what? He said, either I tell you the details of the contract, and I said the price, and you can't say anything, or you set the price, and I don't say anything. Whatever you say, I agree. But if you give me a bad price, I'm not going to work with you again, ever. So he said that was the first time that somebody negotiated a contract with me like that. He said, whatever you say. I said, okay, I'm going to say it. I said, okay, whatever you say, I'm going to sign it. And he said, sign it before I put the number in it. And but so I was so scared I wanted to make sure that I give him a good, like a reasonable deal, so he would continue working with me, and that was it. And he always said that قرارداد مهم نیست، قرار مهمه. I don't know how to translate it in English, but contract is not important. Your word is.
Yeah, the agreement, the essence of the agreement is.
But then in Farsi you have قرار and قرارداد.
قرار, yes.
Yeah.
What did he say about working initially at Binoche? There was a quote in something I read where she was saying she was, obviously she's very excited about the project and she loved the idea, but she said she also wanted to convince Kiarostami that he could work with actors who could portray a character as a real way and as authentic a way as a non-actor could. And so did she convince him?
Yes, and he worked it. But then here's the thing. After he won the Cannes Prize, after that, he started getting a lot of prizes in different festivals. And at some point he said they're giving me more attention because of my name than my film. And I said I'm not gonna compete in any competition anymore. So he basically said from at some point he said I'm not gonna be part of any competition. Until like maybe 15 or 17 years later, then he started going to competitions again. And somebody asked him, but you said you would never compete again. And his answer was, only fools don't change their minds. So I can say the same thing about working with professionals, because all his life he worked with non-professionals, but then he said, after with Juliet Birsada, he said, I realized how much pressure I put on myself for no reason, while I could have worked with a professional. But then, in a different conversation, he told me that he liked working with non-professionals better. So you never knew.
I just want to add this, that it wasn't just working with professional, non-professionals. It was the odd casting choices that he would actually go against the type, or even when he used a professional like Keshavars in Through the Olive Trees, or Shohrab Dashlu in The Report, or others. These were not typical roles that they were known for, or the opera singer.
So there was a reason behind all. So Shohrab Dashlu, that was her first film. So she was not a professional actress. She became a professional actress after that. But with Keshavars, the reason was, so one of the main reasons that he said, I don't want to work with professional actors or actresses, is because you have an image of them. And the director should spend a long time at the beginning to break that image that you have in mind. And then at some point start showing their own image. And that's why he said, I don't want to work with known faces. But in that film, actually, because he was working a director, and he said, I wanted to show that this is fake, purposefully he chose somebody who was a professional actor, that you had an image. So that one had a very specific reason because of that film.
Yes, and then the different layers that, those layers of onion that he peels off. It's like, I am a director, and this guy is playing a director, and I'm directing him in the nested Russian dolls that keep coming off.
Did you find the film? Did you show it under the olive trees?
No, I couldn't find it.
So there's a part in the film that there's a famous dialogue where Hossein, the guy, he has a theory, and he says he's having this conversation at the back of a truck with somebody else. He says, I have a theory that rich people should marry poor people. Literate people should marry illiterate people. This way, their children, they're going to have the option of going to be more balanced, basically. That was the dialogue. The way he did it was, he tells this to Hossein, and says, don't you think that that's an interesting theory? And he says, yes. So that night, he says, Mr. Keshavars, Hossein has a very interesting theory. I was like, which theory? He said, what you were telling me. He said, what? I didn't tell you anything. He said, the story about literate and illiterate. He said, I didn't say it, you say it. He said, it doesn't matter, just say it to Mr. Keshavars. So Hossein repeats that story. The next day, he says the same thing with another guy. This time, Hossein knows the story. And he repeats that 10 times with 10 different people, and the story becomes Hossein's story. And when you see Hossein in front of camera saying that story, it's really his story. So he would play with people in a way that non-professional actors would do the same, would say exact words that he wanted, but with their own words. That's why they were so believable.
Yeah, he said he wouldn't approach any project with more than 3 pages. I mean, the entire treatment and everything that he had with him to approach a project was just 3 pages. Everything else would be fleshed out on the spot and considering the real circumstances.
But he was cheating. I mean,
Oh, yeah. He's,
use Crimson Gold, Panahi's film. You see that actually in that 76-minute that movie. You see him writing the script. It had all the details of the film. So he had those things. He just didn't want. One of the reasons was he didn't want to give those things to the producers because he wanted to be free to change it on the set. That's why he didn't want to have it written. But then for Panahi's film, because he didn't want Panahi to change it, he wrote everything.
spoon-fed him. Well, and a wise choice, because Panahi has a habit of, well, okay. That's a story for another time.
Do you want to open to the audience if you
Yeah, I
have?
think that's a good idea. Yeah.
And then we can show the last film and wrap it up.
I really wanted to ask this question. When Truffaut's daughter was here, I asked her this question. How was it watching a movie with your father? How was it watching television with your father? And I think the most important one here, how was it being in a car with your father?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah,
Okay, I'll repeat it. He said that he also asked this question of Truffaut's daughter when she was here. What was it like watching a movie with your father? What was it like watching television with your father? Most importantly, what was it like being in a car with your father?
My father didn't watch a lot of films. He couldn't. He would watch 10, 15 minutes of it. But he would see all the acting, camera, lights. So he couldn't follow the story because he was seeing all those things. So he almost never watched the film. Even at the festival, I asked him many times, like, you go to festivals, you're a judge, how do you do it? So I see 5 minutes, 10 minutes of it, that's enough. and I can tell you that, so we had a multi-level home and TV set was on the top floor. And once I was sitting there watching a film.
Platoon.
No, it wasn't Platoon, no.
Just came by for 30 seconds.
Yeah, but yeah, you know the story. So he walked upstairs, past the TV, went to the bathroom, and then he went back. On his way back, he said, "Why do you watch this garbage?" I'm like, "What did you see? You didn't see even 30 seconds of it." He said, "I saw enough. That was enough of it." And he was right. It was garbage. So it wasn't easy. It was not easy at all because he would judge the films and he was expecting me like a teenager to watch the films that he was enjoying or the type of art that he was enjoying. In the car, it was different. Very early stage, I separated the Kiarostami filmmaker from Abbas, my father. Those are two different characters. And you can't expect somebody to be always like that. Like I remember there was a comedian in Iran, and there was a Q&A with him, and somebody asked him, "Are you as funny at home?" And he said, "That's a wrong question. Just the same way that a barber stops being a barber when they go home, being funny is my job. When I go home, sometimes I'm funny, sometimes I'm not. The same way that the barber may cut his son's hair, but he's not a barber at home anymore. I'm not funny." And I once said this thing about my father, that at times he would stop being Ahmad Kiarostami. And for me, it was very important at early age to separate those two from each other, if it makes any sense.
Let me ask a related question. What is it like to watch his films and his depiction of children, and especially the Kokara trilogy, where you have this very explicit relationship between a father and a son and traveling? Is there, really no other filmmaker lets children be children like he does. And I'm just wondering what your impressions are.
So the question is, what is it like watching films that are by your father that are about children and have such poignant representations of them, and often in terms of a father and a son.
It's not easy. I mean, it's not easy for me to. I cannot watch his films like films because I have so many memories and different stories attached to those films from the time that he was making it, from the editing it and the screening it. I was 3 years old or 2.5 years old. I saw him on TV getting a prize, and they called him Abbas Kiarostami. And after that, I started calling him Abbas Kiarostami Jun at home. It's like his full name. Little things, like I saw him on his screenings. He usually had private screenings, like limited screenings after he edited the film. And based on the feedback and reaction, he would go and make some minor changes. K1 would come to many of those screenings. I would sit there, and I was standing here right now tonight, and I was looking at the reaction, the places that you laughed or didn't laugh, or a couple of people cried. That's one of the words at some point. I remember watching his films for the first time on big screen, and being very worried about people's reaction. Like I don't have that feeling about the other films, so I can't really tell you because it's very different. It's like it has nothing to do with me, but it's kind of like it's mine. It was mine, and I was nervous about it, and all that. So I never watched his films in terms of just watching films.
Just restoring, which organization is restoring your father's film?
Which organization is restoring your father's films?
The combination of MCADO in France and Criterion in the US. So Criterion is restoring the Coker trilogy right now, and it's going to be ready later this year. They may release it before the whole thing come out, but the rest of it is being restored by MCADO.
So Through the Olive Trees is no longer owned by Miramax?
No.
Okay, so because I remember the story of the shelving of the Through the Olive Trees was because Miramax bought it and shelved it in the U.S.
Yeah, because for tax reasons. I started hating.
Way before.
Yeah, Weinstein, before all these things happened, before this Me Too thing happened.
I mean, if anybody actually was watching closely, would have hated Harvey Weinstein a long time ago.
Yeah, Harvey Weinstein was the head of the company. That he basically bought the film for the U.S. but never showed it. He only showed it like twice, and that was it for tax reasons.
You can't get it. It's impossible.
But now it's coming out because they don't have the right anymore, and Criterion has it.
Bamfa was able to show it. The Berkeley Theater was able to show it last year and a half ago, luckily. So a few people were able to catch that, but it's very rare for sure.
Yeah.
More questions?
Is correspondence being included in that collection?
Correspondence with Victor Erithe?
Yeah. We don't know yet, but I hope so. Yes.
Yes. For those of you who don't know, PFA actually 2 years ago had a screening of all Victor Erithe's films, including the video correspondence with Abbas Kiarostami, which is one of the most amazing letter exchanges you'll ever see in your life. Starting with the quince tree, the son of the quince tree, and the response that Kiarostami gives to the son of the quince tree. I mean, it's something that everybody should see.
That's funny that you had mentioned that. I didn't know that they had a correspondence, but I was lucky enough to see a screening of 24 Frames, and one of the first things that had come to mind was the visual essay that Arise had done, Le Morte Rouge, in which there was a lot of kind of personal elements to it, in which I thought were very relatable to 24 Frames, mostly because that film seemed to me as kind of like an amalgamation of everything that he had created so far. There's a quote from Close Up that I think helps contextualize it, as well as his entire filmography. And it was, for me, art is the experience of what you felt inside. And I thought that was super powerful because in 24 Frames, Kiarostami had, he kind of perfected the two different landscapes of like blending the different manifestations of art. So he did it in both like a formal way with the photography and the video, but it's almost in like a very visceral and internal way for his own art, because his whole intent the entire time was capturing that truth. And I feel like by
by doing it on those two different planes, he was actually able to capture that truth. And with that, I'm curious as to how you would approach such an endeavor as to finishing a film that was posthumously completed, and in what sense did you have to finish, and how did you approach it?
So the question, first off, thank you for your comments. Where did you see the film?
I saw it on Vimeo. I was lucky enough to get a screener and see it on Vimeo.
Oh, interesting. Good to know Links is out. That's a good question. It's a longer answer. But because we're going to have the opening at Roxie, I'm going to use this opportunity to invite you to the... I'm going to have a Q&A there on May 17th. March 17th, yes. Specifically about 24 frames. I'm going to talk about it in details. But in short, the answer is he had made everything. I didn't make any artistic decision. He had made all the artistic decision himself. There was a lot of post-production. The only artistic thing that I did was the sound of the film, which is a very important part. But again, I had all the cues from himself, from Abbas himself. So I didn't make any creative decision except for very minor things. And then we had to change one of the songs because we couldn't get the copyright for it. So we had to change that. Those are the only artistic changes that I made. It was a lot of work, a lot of post-production work, but not a lot of artistic work.
Back there.
Hi. How did the communities that he filmed in react to him filming, especially the reconstruction of those communities in the films?
So the question is, how did the communities where he filmed, and how did they react to the
film process and the reconstruction of those communities?
Okay, the reconstruction of those communities.
I can't give you a complete answer because the truth is I don't know. But the ones that I know, which might be a selective thing, they were usually very happy. Actually, you see again in that documentary, you see that after, I don't know, maybe 17, 18 years, he goes back to where they shot under the olive trees. And he visits the home, he visits the girl who played in that film. And she comes out and she knew what was going on. They were very friendly, so you can see in her face and her interaction that she was very happy about the whole experience, even after all those years. One of the people who were not happy for a while was Sabzian. Sabzian was not happy at all from close up. But then there are things that you can't do anything. Sabzian wanted to be a film, and he ended up in the film, and you might be interested to know that what happened to him. He passed away a few years ago, unfortunately. But he joined Sepah, IRGC, the second army of Iran, because they had a budget for films, for war films. He became the guy who would read the scripts and say if they would give the money or not. So I think
he made a short film too that they showed at PFA.
And there's another film about Sabzian also, which a documentary I like.
You're right. Moslem Mansouri made the film about Sabzian. That's right.
Yes, that's the film, which I very much like it. But I think also it's natural that I know the ones who are happy. I don't know the ones who are not happy. But also there's another film with the guy who played in Musafir, in The Traveler. And there's a new video that came out, I saw it on Facebook, which was very interesting, and he's still very happy about the experience that he had. This guy who played in this film, in the first one that we saw, The Bread and Alley, he is probably 7-8 years older than me, and he lived in the same neighborhood that I grew up. And I would see him on the street. And I was in Tehran when the election was a year and a half ago. And I saw him. And he was very sick, but he was very proud of what he did. So I don't know if that answers your question or not. And again, I have a selective information.
Let me just very briefly interject that he didn't reconstruct communities because his projects were usually very modest. So he would redecorate a house or do something in a very modest scale. I mean, he didn't make Fitzcarraldo to drag a ship across the continent. There were small projects that he would repaint a house or do
So
something.
he actually repainted the whole village for two of the films, but then just cleaning up the village and painting the village, but not reconstructing anything. You're right.
I was going to ask if you could say a little bit about what you think the most important changes in his filmmaking were at the end of his life versus, because you talked a little bit about, some of the things he learned in terms of taking creative liberties and being true to his own vision. But at the end of his life, did you notice any marked differences in his approaches to filmmaking?
So the question is, what kinds of differences did you see in how he thought about his filmmaking towards the end of his life as compared to earlier?
I actually want to expand your question, not just with filmmaking, but with art. And he always said that I'm not a filmmaker. I'm an artist, and I have different mediums of expressing myself. Film is one of them. But in the recent years, he was less and less interested in films in general. And he said, I'm not interested in telling stories. He became more abstract in his work, a lot more abstract. And he said he didn't like to deal with everything that would come with films, like from the budget to production, having a producer, and all those things. And he said, at the same time, because of the minimalism of it, he said, I love the fact that I can tell a story in a single shot. In the reviews that came out in the past few weeks since 24 Frames was released in New York, there was one review that I very much liked. He said, if you are not familiar with Kiarostami's cinema, this is not a good film to watch. But if you are familiar, this is the best possible ending to his work. And it's not just his poetry and his cinema, it's also a video installation. It's cinema, photography, poetry, video installation. All of that comes into one thing, which is 24 Frames. And actually, he did 2 photo series. I showed some of them last time at SJSU. He did some photo series that he learned a lot about how he could manipulate things in a constructive way. Let me show some of those pictures. I have those here. And this is how he started. He was very interested in snows. These are from his snow series. But then he would come to my office and he would ask about, because he started doing digital photography at some point, but he didn't know how to operate computers. So he would come to my office and I would ask, can you help him with this? Changing the contrast, little things. And this is 20-something years ago. It wasn't as easy as it is today. But you can see that these pictures are becoming more and more abstract. I'm sorry. Or this one, for example. And then as he learned things about computer, he started doing other things. And then you see all those things in 24 frames as well, because nothing in 24 frames is real. It's coming from different pictures, different videos, different. He assembled the whole film in 3 years on the computer. This is another series. These series have not been shown anywhere, and I'm currently talking to several museums about showing these. This is the only series that he has with people in it. And it's about the interaction between art and people. Sorry. No. All of a sudden, he got a lot more freedom to do things that he wanted to do and be more playful. And you can see all that playfulness in these photos. So you see the contrast between the cover here and this one's my favorite. And then there's another series that we have not shown anywhere. Like I said, there are two photo series, which he combined Monet's paintings with his own photography. In each selection, there are more than 65 artwork, and I'm only showing you some of them.
Those are incredible.
Thank you.
This might sound like a weird question, but I just wanted to know, what is the importance of the zigzag corner? Or, I don't know, is there any relation to it? Because you see it everywhere. And it's just, I mean, to me, it's just such a great thing to just keep seeing, because it's kind of like you saw it all.
It's not straight.
Yeah. And also, it's really surprisingly balanced. So I didn't really know.
So she's asking about what is the significance of the zigzag pattern that recurs in his work.
There is nothing direct in any of his films, but there's always this oblique simplicity. So the zigzag pattern too is also gets to where you're start off to get to, but it's not a straight path, and that actually none of the characters. Remember, the young boy in Where Is the Friend's Home does not get to the destination that it gets out to be, but the journey itself is what is important. And this actually the zigzag pattern is also about these detours, these deflections. And these deflections and detours are actually at the heart of the film. Not getting there, getting from point A to B to C, to actually go through different dramatic structure of the film did not interest a man who said a few years ago, actually that was to Godfrey Cheshire. He said to Godfrey Cheshire that the age of Shahrazad the storyteller is over. I'm no longer interested in Shahrazad. I'm interested in, creating the scenes or the patterns that I'm creating, but I'm not interested in telling stories the way that Shahrazad tells stories.
Maybe we.
It's fine. Maybe yours. I don't know how to put this, but when I was watching his movies, what I was always wondering was that. So he always had different chapters in his life. The pre-Islamic, the pre-revolution chapter, post-revolution chapter, and each of his films kind of deal with a certain type of theme, I guess, like his Cherry Suicide and the Certified Copy is divorce or anything. I was always wondering, were any of his life experiences, how much did his life experiences affect the scripts that he came up with, or did he keep those always separate?
So the question is, how much did his life experiences affect the kinds of stories that he ended up creating in his screenplays?
I think you cannot separate an artist from his life experience in general. That's given, especially in that kind of work. So it is all related to his own life. But he specifically talked about one film, which was the second film of Koker trilogy. And he said that he was a sad person, an angry person. And that big earthquake happened in Iran on the night of his 50th birthday. And the next day he went to see what happened and what happened to the children of Where's My Friend's Home. And the experience of seeing people after the earthquake changed the way he saw life, which is, you see it in the film. But in general, yes, I think it definitely, everything that's in his films is a reflection of something. But also there's a quote from Milan Kundera. He says that in my books, all of those characters that you see in the books are me, but they also go to places that I as a person don't dare to go, which I think is a very good way of describing this. Maybe we can show 24 frames and then wrap it up. Before we do that, I want to mention one thing, that I started a foundation, Kiarostami Foundation, to basically do three things: archiving his old works because everything is very unorganized, finishing 3 projects. One was 24 frames that's finished, and 2 are these photo series, and then we have some new ideas, some projects. And if any of your students are interested in helping, there might be, I'm still defining things, and we just got our non-profit status 2 weeks ago, and we're forming the board and all that, but if there's something, please get my email and email me and let me know. Should we?
I'm sure there would be people, yeah, for sure.
And I want to thank you. I know some of you had to come here for your grades, But I thank everybody for coming here on a Saturday night and staying here this late. Thank you. So we're going to show one more frame, and then I think we're done.
من آخر سرش تشکر. just want to mention the question that Persis asked about the direction, the kind of rupture in the work. First of all, digital technology, 2002, ABC Africa, and then 10, and then everything else that kind of liberated Kiarostami from a lot of burden that came with filmmaking crews. Number two is the directions that he was taking, so he wouldn't be repeating the same thing that made him a favorite of film festivals. Godard calling him the end of cinema and all of that, which didn't mean much to Kiarostami one way or another. I mean, Godard calling me the bookend of the end of the cinema, or then later on taking that back and calling him having lost his way. Neither one, made any change, but any difference in his life. The fact was that he was constantly looking for all these new venues to express himself, to kind of combine and bring together various aspects of his art. We're looking at this. This is neither two-dimensional or three-dimensional. The idea of three-dimensionality being expressed on a two-dimensional surface has completely been blurred in every way. So it is so exciting, the directions that he was moving into, and makes it all the more painful to think that we have lost him, that he's no longer with us. I mean, one thing that we didn't acknowledge tonight was the fact that all the possibilities that he was opening up, and a film like Shirin in itself is one of the most amazing things in the 2000s. I mean, nobody talks about Shirin, but Shirin maybe requires an entire discussion unto itself. A film without actually images to kind of reinforce the soundtrack, this kind of complete disengagement of the soundtrack and the images doing something completely different, all of that. So, I mean, for my part, I just want to acknowledge the fact that every time I see something new, especially posthumous stuff, I'm thinking of all the possibilities that were left unexplored. And I really, really want to thank Ahmad for taking on the very difficult task and the mantle of finishing 24 frames. And also want to thank Britta and Persis for holding this and organizing this amazing, I'm not talking about myself, I'm saying that, looking at this amazing work.
Yeah, thank you, Britta. Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
We're really honored to have you both here. That was truly an honor to just get to share and seeing that new work that is just coming to the light of day, and I think we've all been part of something really special. So thank you so much for coming.